Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Conditions in Cuba continue to worsen after nearly 2 months of a U.S.-imposed oil blockade. 10 million Cubans were left without electricity and running water when the national power grid collapsed again earlier this week. Most of the electrical grid has now been reconnected, and a Russian oil tanker is apparently on its way to the island, but millions of people are still in the dark, struggling for basic necessities.
It's not just a blackout. There is no water, no electricity, no gas. There is no water because there is no electricity to run the pumps. There is no electricity, no food, no oil, no fuel, and private businesses have high prices. All of this is really very bad.
The blockade is part of Donald Trump's plan to put pressure on Cuba's government, pressure he escalated this week with comments that he made in the Oval Office.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba
in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it.
The CBC's Jorge Barrera is in Havana, Cuba this morning. Jorge, good morning.
Good morning.
What is the situation like in the city right now?
There's a tense calm here. In the tourist areas, they're empty. Very few people in the restaurants or in the big hotels around the center, and barely anyone along the famed Havana seawall. The taxi drivers with those big old classic cars sit around waiting for fares that don't appear. You look down some of the alleyways, garbage piling up. And I was told that local traffic is a fraction of its normal level. But people are getting on with life, going to work, shopping for the essentials, lining up at the bank. Couple of old men playing chess here, a group of 4 playing dominoes there, kids playing soccer in the park, and still in places, music's in the air.
Are the lights on? I mentioned that some of the grid has been reconnected, but are the lights on in Havana where you are?
Because Havana is a seat of government and the most important, tourism spot, the lights are on. They have been on since we arrived here. I was in a neighborhood north of the city, and they said they've actually had electricity 2 days in a row. There's some parts of other neighborhoods closer to the center that did go through most of yesterday without power, and then that they suddenly got power around 8 p.m. in the evening. So Havana itself is lit up. There is electricity here, and a lot of the hotels here also have their own power generation.
It's not just electricity, as we heard, that's also running water and the high cost of food as well. What have you been hearing and seeing from people about just trying to make ends meet?
Well, people are having to readjust their lives, plan their days around when they're going to have power, getting ready for the moment the electricity comes in. That's when they make their food. Also, they can only buy perishables for the day that they're going to use it. Their meats and chickens, filling up tubs of water for the time the power goes out, and so they don't run out of water. But as you mentioned, the price of food, that's the issue that people spoke about. That's the issue that's creating the most misery for people, because the food is there, but it's becoming increasingly unattainable. And people, the parents with children, are going hungry so their children can eat. For example, they told us that the price of chicken has gone from about 18 pesos a pound, Cuban pesos, to about 300 pesos a pound. And it's because of the price of gasoline and transportation. Gasoline, a lot of people are buying their gasoline on the black market. And the price of gas was about $1.31 a liter US. It is now about $10 a liter US in this black market. But in Havana, people say they're going to find a way to tough it out because they've lived through this for decades. And this is just making things that were already a problem that much worse.
How is the Cuban government explaining to its people what's going on and what the plan is to deal with what is clearly a worsening situation?
What people have told us about what they feel that the government is telling them is that all of this is blamed on U.S. President Donald Trump, on the oil blockade. But the government is also trying to control the message at home. We came across some information that the Cuban government had issued a directive to its local media that it produced more positive stories about people living their normal, everyday lives, that things are going to be okay, that they're dealing with it, and that claims to the contrary, that there's some kind of potential uprising or revolt that's brewing, that all of that is part of a counter-revolutionary campaign, Matt.
Whether it's an uprising or a revolt, there are reports about people out protesting, banging pots and pans at night in Havana, which is a very rare scene, particularly in a country that is a dictatorship that has jailed dissidents for decades now. What can you tell us about that? I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of that, but what are people saying about the fact that people are actually out protesting in Cuba?
They are, and we haven't seen it yet, but in speaking with people, going to neighborhoods, they tell us, yes, at night people have gone out and banged the pots, the cacerolas. Also, there's, people say that police cars, on patrol are being hit by rocks, that there is a growing frustration. There was a flare-up in a town outside of Havana where a Communist Party building was burnt down. So there is a simmering tension, but at the same time, that type of frustration is, I guess you could say, tempered by just the need to survive day to day. And that's what people say, the idea that there's going to be some sort of, uprising against the government, that they feel that it's far from reality because the need to survive is just so much greater right now. It's
hard to get a read on how people feel, in part because of the fact that, as I said, dissidents are often jailed by the state. But what is your sense as to how much support the government in Cuba has right now from its people?
That's a tough question to answer based on, anecdotal evidence from our time here on the ground, very short time on the ground. But we did hear a wide range of views about the government. There are some people, when you speak to them, they do still have faith in the government. They have a belief that the government is going to find a way to get them through this phase. But there's others that will tell you, and they won't tell you on camera because there's still this shadow of fear of speaking out. Some people, not everybody, some people will speak. There is a sense that things are a little looser, but there's some people who still will not speak about because they actually are afraid that even if they talk about that they're suffering or that they're having hardship, that somehow the government will interpret that as that you're sort of indirectly blaming the government for that. So they don't want to talk. But off camera, they'll say, maybe it's best if Trump does send troops and push people out of power because there's no other way. But most of the people that I spoke to are in this in-between space. They see the government as just part of a reality they have to face and live with. And the last thing that they want to see is armed conflict.
We're going to talk more in just a moment about the U.S. president and what he may or may not do. But just how are people responding, just finally, to that idea? Trump saying, I'll take Cuba. I can do whatever I want with it.
When you speak to people about this, there's this hint of defiance from some. It's like, no, like Cuba is ours and we're gonna fix our own issues. We don't need someone to come out from the outside and fix them for us. There's also, some animosity towards the what they see as the politics of the Miami expat Cuban community that they say haven't lived in this country for many years. What they think of as Cuba is not the reality on the ground. There is a desire for the Cuban people who remain to deal with the situation now, and that if something comes from the outside, it may actually make things so much worse, Matt.
It's just interesting. Canadians have close ties to Cuba in part because that's an island that a lot of people will go to. We're just coming out of winter right now, and people will often go to Cuba because it's a cheap place for a vacation. And that tourism sector has essentially collapsed, right?
It has collapsed, but you can still get here through Mexico. That's how we got here. So there are a smattering of tourists around. They still want to be able to cater to tourism. So there's still avenues that you can get into Cuba. There's still a shortage of medicine, of non-perishables. We have this flotilla that's on its way. There's some planned events around that issue. So there still is a hope that tourists will come. The hotels still have the lights on, waiting for people. When you walk down, some of the alleyways where the touristy restaurants, even though there's barely anybody there, people are still on the doorstep trying to draw people in. So even in these situations, there's still an attempt to just squeeze what they can with what they have right now.
Jorge, good to talk to you about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The CBC's Jorge Barrera was in Havana. Sebastián Arcos left Cuba in the early 1990s. He's interim director of the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. Sebastián's in Miami this morning. Sebastián, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. You have called this Cuba's Berlin Wall moment. What do you mean by that?
What it means is what most Cubans are feeling both inside the island and outside the island, that this is the opportunity to get the country back from this dictatorship that has been controlling Cuba for the last 67 years. And there is a sense of tension combined with optimism and a lot of uncertainty, because we have been here before when the Soviet Union collapsed. And I was in Cuba at the time. I was a dissident in Cuba at the time. We all thought, okay, this is it. You know, it's coming to us. We will be the next domino to fall. It didn't happen. And it created a lot of frustration on Cubans, both inside and outside. It looks like this time we are there. This time, this is truly our Berlin Wall moment.
What is different now? Is it just you have the collapse of tourism and a huge part of the economy, but also a U.S. president who says that he'll take Cuba? How does that shape this moment?
The difference is fundamental. The regime has run its time. It has exhausted Cuban nationalism. He has exhausted his own political legitimacy. He has devastated the economy. People just don't believe what the regime says anymore. They just want to get rid of it. That's one part. The other part is that the United States, for the first time since 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, has decided that it will no longer just sit and wait for the regime to fall on its own. He has become an active agent of change. He has created this situation we are now with the fuel quarantine, and is essentially pushing the regime into a corner to change, to begin a process of change. And there's a clear MO that the president has exercised in Venezuela and now in Iran, and it will be coming to Cuba. He offers negotiations. If they run into a dead end, then he goes kinetic. And I have a feeling that he will have to go kinetic in Cuba.
Kinetic meaning taking power and removing those who are in power? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I mean.
How likely is that if you take a look at Venezuela, in Venezuela, the United States essentially installs the former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as the leader after Nicolas Maduro was snatched from the country. Delcy Rodriguez is working with the Trump administration. Does that person exist in Cuba? Somebody who is in a seat of power but is different enough that it would work with the United States but also with the wishes of the Cuban people?
People like that exist everywhere, including totalitarian regimes. We have seen it in history. Hungary in 1956, the person who eventually led the revolt against the Soviets was an army general that was loyal to the party before he decided that it was better to be loyal to the Hungarian people. Now, the difference between Venezuela and Cuba is fundamental. Venezuela is an authoritarian regime, but it's still transparent. You have different poles of power. You can identify who to talk to, and you can even approach that person. In a totalitarian regime, it's very opaque, it's very hierarchical. It's very difficult to identify individual players now. And if you even talk to one of those, it may cost them their lives very well, because they will be betraying the leadership. And that's not acceptable in a totalitarian regime. If the regime cracks under pressure, which is the intent, I believe, of the Trump administration, then there's an opportunity for other people to surface. And that's our opportunity to find our Delcy Rodriguez in Cuba. More than a Delcy Rodriguez, I'm thinking Adolfo Suarez in Spain in the 1970s, who was a great member of the ruling government under Franco, and eventually became the prime minister that led the country to a peaceful transition to democracy. That's what we need in Cuba.
You're in Miami. How do you think Cuban exiles are a very potent political force there? Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is part of that exile community. How do you think that community would respond to something like that? Because my sense is many people in that community want wholesale change and would not be particularly pleased to see somebody still associated with the regime take power.
It is true that the community is looking for wholesale change, and not just the community. People in Cuba also want change to happen as quickly as possible because the situation there is dire. It is inevitable to deal with someone who is today in the Cuban regime. There are choices, I'm sure, that we will have, particularly within the military, because the military has not been involved directly or indirectly in repression against opposition, against the population. So there will be someone in the military. They have the guns, so they can take care of security in the country. They also have the bank accounts, because Raúl Castro made the military into the most powerful institution in Cuba. There must be someone there. The community understands that there will be the need to talk to and deal with someone that is today in the Cuban government. But as it happened in Poland in 1988, we can create a roundtable that brings together that side of the government that is willing to change, the Cuban internal opposition and the Miami external opposition together, and then plan together a transition process that should take 2 or 3 years and no more than that, and should begin with political reforms to bring then economic reforms after that.
We're out of time, but just briefly, let me go back to your comments at the beginning that you see this as a Berlin Wall moment. You grew up in Cuba. As I mentioned, you were a dissident as well. What is it like for you to see this moment unfold?
It's extraordinary. I have been trying to suppress my enthusiasm for the last 2 months. I have grown older. I am a little more skeptic of things happening in such a nice and quick way. There will be bumps on the road. Absolutely, there will. But I remember the sense of elation I had when the Berlin Wall fell, and all of the communist countries in Europe fell one right after the other. And this is the kind of sense that Cubans are having right now. This is our turn. This is truly our moment.
Even if it's Donald Trump who is the one who is leading that, who says, I can do whatever I want with the island?
Well, the president banters, and we are used to that. I'm not worried about that language. Cuba is not going to become a state of the United States. I think Cuban nationalism is at its lowest point ever since our first war of independence in 1868, because the regime has abused that nationalism so much that people just want anything, anybody to fix this. But the United States is not willing, and I think Puerto Rico, being there for so many years, is the best evidence, is not interested in having another state.
Could you imagine going back to Cuba?
I'd think about it. I don't think I'm going to go back.
We will watch the story unfold. As I said, Canadians have close ties to Cuba, but this is a story that is happening in our neighborhood as well, and perhaps we'll have the opportunity to talk again. In the meantime, Sebastián, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sebastián Arcos is the interim director of the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. He left Cuba in 1990. Sebastián Arcos was in Miami. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.